What's up, y'all? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Today I'm flying solo. Randy wasn't able to make it on the stream tonight, and so I'm going to be talking about a very interesting topic, which is basically the number one way that you guys can improve your bass fishing in 2021. A very specific strategy that I believe everyone watching the stream can implement to catch a lot more fish, simplify their fishing, and make fishing a lot more enjoyable. So I'll be getting into how you can actually go about implementing this strategy on any lake in the country over the next hour. Should be a really good stream, and glad to see everyone joining me for the stream tonight. We got John, Kurt, Mike, Timo, Marshall, Nick. We got Jerry, a bunch of guys on the stream. Glad everyone is tuning in. And just a couple announcements before we get in the stream while we let people get on. First, we're actually going to be moving the Fish the Moment live stream to a brand new page. I set up a new YouTube channel called Fish the Moment Live. I'll put a link down in the description of this video. You can also find a link to this on my YouTube channel page. I'll show you guys this later in the stream, and I'll also be posting it on social media, so hopefully you'll be able to catch the stream, but it won't be on the Fish the Moment main channel anymore. I've got some constructive feedback that the videos that are really long kind of smother my really good fully edited videos. Take like 20 to 30 minutes to edit, or 20-30 minute videos take me like 20-30 hours to edit. So I spend a ton of time editing certain videos, and then these live streams are thrown up on the channel also. It's confusing to try to find one type of content from another. So we're going to be moving over all the live streams to a new channel, so that the only videos on the Fish the Moment channel are going to be these super high quality edited videos. Another announcement to make is that we're going to be going to one video a week, every single week on the Fish the Moment channel. I've been prepping for this over the last month, making sure I got everything squared away, got content backlogged, everything like that. And I'll be posting a video at 8 a.m. Central Standard Time every single Thursday. So be on the lookout for that. I got a lot of great content that I've already got in the bucket that we should be able to show you guys, and it should be some great content. So excited about that. And other than that, gonna get straight into the stream. How's everyone going? Got 115 people on all the way, so excited about that. So let's jump into the topic. Basically, what the premise for this stream is finding a way to simplify your bass fishing. I see a lot of guys get in trouble, because actually, let me share my screen here. This is what gets a lot of anglers in trouble. We're going to go over to Tackle Warehouse, everyone's favorite website. We got Tackle Warehouse here. And one thing that a lot of guys struggle with is they go to Tackle Warehouse, they go over to the main page, and they start looking at all these top-selling baits. They watch a bunch of YouTube channels telling them to go fish an underspin, go fish a blade bait, a deep diving crankbait, a swim bait, a micro jig. Then you got a bunch of different robo worms, more crankbaits, chatterbaits, spinnerbaits, all this stuff. And it's like, what should I be fishing on my lake? So confusing. And a lot of guys spend more time tying on new baits and new colors of baits than they actually do keeping their bait in the water and catching fish. This is something that is very common. Sorry, I wasn't showing my screen there. All these different baits on Tackle Warehouse. And when you see all these different baits, basically what I feel like it does to all new anglers is cloud their judgment. They start focusing more on their tackle box than they do on the surroundings, the lake conditions, birds in the sky, what the weather is doing, all these different factors. And so many guys get focused on having the right rod, the right reel, the right line, that they miss some of the biggest signs that can help you actually catch fish. So what I want to talk about in this stream is how to actually go about simplifying your fishing approach so that you can use the baits that are going to produce the best fish for you and put them in the best possible area. And we'll kind of explain how we'll do that throughout the stream. So if this is interesting to you guys, let me know over in the comments. This is something that hopefully you guys are going to enjoy listening to. So really, the way that I go about breaking down the lake, if I pull up, for example, Google Earth over here. We got Google Earth. I'm actually going to pull up a different screen so we can see it full screen. Give me a second here, guys. There we go. Make that full screen for you. So got Grand Lake here in Oklahoma pulled up. And when I go out to Grand Lake, what I'm trying to do obviously is catch as many fish as possible as quickly as possible. And there are a million ways to catch fish any given day on Grand Lake. So for example, we could go here to Honey Creek and we could catch fish off of some of these main boat docks, fishing a jig and a shaky head. Or you can run up the lake and maybe go into the Echo Bay area and catch them throwing a spinner bait on some flooded bushes. Or you could go way up the river and catch them throwing a squirrelbill crankbait on laydowns. You could go way down by the dam where you have clear water and catch them on a swim bait and Alabama rig. You can do jerkbait fishing on main lake points like Randy likes to do. There's a million different ways to go about fishing, and you probably watch my YouTube videos, other YouTube videos, and you see all these different techniques, and you want to try everything on a given fishing day. But then when you go out to the lake, you sample a little bit of everything, and you end up catching no fish because you're spending so much time changing up techniques, changing up your mindset that you're never able to get dialed in on one specific pattern. And that's something I used to do a ton when I was growing up, when I was fishing in tournaments from when I was 12 till I was about 18 years old. I was like an information sponge, trying to take in as much information as possible. The problem was that I wasn't able to spend enough time on the water to master each technique. So when I would get out to the lake, I would say, I want to go catch them on a jerkbait today. But I wouldn't know the best weather conditions, the best time of day, the best water clarity, water temperature, all those factors that are crucial to a jerkbait bite. I didn't know which conditions needed to line up for me to actually catch them on a jerkbait. So I go out and I just randomly run around the lake, fish a jerkbait, try different retrieves, and changed out 7 different brands of jerkbaits, and I just wouldn't catch them. And I'm like, what's going on? And what I realized is that the only way I was going to get better at fishing in general was mastering one technique at a time. And what I focused on with my early fishing is fishing a jig and a crankbait. I found that if I catch fish on a jig and a crankbait, I could catch them any time of the year, year-round, in a lot of different conditions. And that's what I started. I developed my skills with a jerkbait and a crankbait. A jig and a crankbait. And then throughout the years, I added 1 or 2 other weapons to my arsenal. I now really like to fish a swim bait as well. So I fish like finesse swim baits offshore. I fish up shallower. So basically now my repertoire of fishing is fishing a swim bait, a jig, and a crankbait. And this really allows me to focus in my fishing because when I go to Grand Lake, I can look at the conditions for the day, analyze what bait is best under those conditions, and then choose from one of those 3 categories of baits before I ever make casts. So for example, if I go to Grand Lake and it's bright bluebird skies, it doesn't really matter what time of year, it could be any time of the year, but whenever I have a bright bluebird skies, sunny skies, no wind, maybe no clouds, like a bright bluebird day, I know that somewhere on Grand Lake I can catch them fishing a jig. And I can catch them fishing a jig both offshore and up shallow. Now, I might have to fish different areas of the lake to get those bites to work. So, for example, if I want to fish up shallow, maybe this time of year the best place is to run into the back of a creek, like back in here in Horse Creek, and fish the jig around some boat docks. The boat docks provide shade, and they also provide some nice cover for the bass. Now, on the other hand, I might be able to go out to the main lake, or maybe the first third of the creeks, and if we pull up a Navionics map, let me pull this up over here, I might find that on Grand Lake, I might be able to go out onto some secondary points and main lake points that stick off the bank and drop in the channel, like right out here. And I might be able to drag a football jig offshore and also catch fish. But I know that on any given day, whether I'm fishing offshore, whether I'm fishing shallow, I can throw a jig to catch fish. So this allows me to narrow down my bait selection to one category, just a jig. When there's bright bluebird skies, sunny skies, I'm throwing a jig, that's it. And I might mix in other baits throughout the day, but when I'm trying to just first locate the fish, I'm going to commit myself to throwing a jig all day long until I start catching fish. So what I'll do is I'll pick up a handful of jigs, and really I only need like 3 jigs for my fishing. The first is obviously the Fish the Moment offshore jig. You guys have heard about this in my videos before. It's a football jig with double cable guard, comes through brush better than any jig on the market, premium hook with a premium skirt, and you can get 2 of these jigs for $6.99 on jewelbait.com. It's a 2-pack, 5/8 ounce jig for $6.99, great deal. So I'll get one of these tied on. I'll also tie on Jewelbait Tactical Pro Spider Jig. This is a finesse jig. Really like this jig from Jewel as well. It has a nice stout hook that I can flip into heavy cover. It won't bend out on me. I can also throw, I'm going to make myself a little bit smaller over here, guys. Just give me a second. I'm like taking up half the screen over here. You guys don't need to see my face that bad. There we go. A little bit smaller. Got the Tactical Pro Spider jig here. So this is great for fishing up in shallower water. I can also fish it out a little bit deeper. It's a 7/16 ounce jig, so it's kind of my in-between depth jig. The Fish the Moment offshore jig is for when I'm fishing maybe 10 to, let's say, 50 feet of water, however deep I'm fishing. The finesse jig is when I'm fishing in 5 to 10 foot of water. And then when I'm fishing less than 5 foot of water, I'll go to a Strike King Hack Attack flipping jig. And I'll put this on heavy line, 20, 25 pound fluorocarbon, maybe some braided line. And I'll go to anything from like a half ounce to a 1 1/4 ounce jig, depending on what I'm doing. So I'll usually have 3 jigs in the deck of the boat: the finesse jig, the flipping jig, and the football jig. Now that I've narrowed down my bait selection to those few key baits, I'm going to go back over to the lake and I'm going to start eliminating different patterns in different sections of the lake. I no longer have to worry about the bait. The bait is completely decided. I don't need to worry about that. I know when there's sunny skies, that's the best condition for myself to go catch jigfish. Now I just have to go find fish that'll bite the jig. Now, on any given day, it might take a while to actually determine where on the lake these fish are setting up and what depth they're in. So what I'll do is I'll usually pick a creek. I'll, for example, take Horse Creek here. It could be Drowning Creek down here, or could be Duck Creek. It doesn't really matter which creek you're in. I just like to pick some sort of major creek. Now, if you're on a different style of lake, maybe if you don't have a lot of creeks, maybe just pick a section of the lake that is maybe 2 to 3 miles long, or maybe 200 yards long, depending on how big your lake is. It kind of just depends lake to lake. So for example, if I was on like a Lake Spavinaw here, this is a much smaller lake, but what I would do is I would just pick, let's say, a 1 mile section of this lake and focus there. And, you know, on a lake like this size, you might be able to cover the entire thing. But as you get bigger and bigger, like on a lake like Hudson Lake here, I might just pick a section of this lake that's a couple miles long, and I'll bounce around the main lake and maybe into some of these creeks. But on a lake like Grand Lake that's so big, this is almost its own lake in itself in a lot of parts of the country. So I'll just pick this giant zone as where I'm going to focus on for the day. Now that I've kind of determined where I'm going to be fishing, I now need to start determining what depth these fish are in and what type of cover they're around. So again, I'm focused in on just throwing my jig. That's all I'm going to do. And I'm going to go to Grand here, and I'm going to start on the main lake. And what I'll start by doing is fishing, and maybe I'll graph around offshore. I'll usually graph with my electronics. I won't just start fishing offshore. But I'll graph around with my electronics, and anywhere from 30 feet of water up to 10 foot of water on main lake points, some humps or stuff out here, different points here. And I'm just going to check several different points from 25 to 10 foot of water. If I don't see a lot of fish on the main lake offshore with my electronics, I'll then start sliding up and maybe fishing a few boat docks that are in some of these shorter cuts, or maybe fishing just down some of these steeper points with that finesse jig. Just trying to hit any sort of cover I can find, brush piles, lay down logs, a nice rocky bank. And then if I don't get bit on any of that, then I might slide up into shallower water, maybe around some flooded bushes, or maybe on some boat docks in the backs of these pockets. And I'll spend maybe 2 hours checking out the main part of this lake. Now I'm going to experiment with a little bit of everything. A little bit offshore, a little bit of shallow, a little bit of in between with those 3 jigs I mentioned. Then I'm going to slide into the midsection of Horse Creek. I'll go in this area here, and I might go fish a couple boat docks over here, shallow, flip a couple stretches of bushes maybe that are over here, for example, and then I might try some of these offshore humps, graph around out here in 20 foot of water on some offshore humps out here. And again, spend 2 hours just checking a bunch of different types of areas. If you guys are interested in knowing which areas to check out on Grand Lake, I have a lot of videos explaining the best types of areas in each season of the year, pre-spawn, winter. You can just go to Fish the Moment YouTube channel, check out, you can put in like top 5 areas, Fish the Moment, into YouTube search bar, and you're going to get a ton of videos explaining what type of areas to look for, both shallow and offshore, with contour maps, all that stuff. Not really the purpose of this video here, but you can definitely find content, and I make a lot of YouTube videos showing contour maps and showing exactly where to fish, the reasoning and stuff like that. I'm not going to go into the details here because it's not relevant for this discussion. But basically, I'm just experimenting with a lot of different stuff, and if I don't get bit in this area, then I'm going to head to the back of this creek, and I'm going to start doing the same thing, bouncing around, fishing a little bit of stuff off the bank, graphing around, maybe fishing some steeper banks with a finesse jig, and then go flip some docks or flip some lay down logs or whatever up shallow. And usually, if I have bright sunny skies throughout the entire day, and I take that approach from the main lake all the way to the back of the creek with one category of bait, mixing up the water depth, mixing up the type of cover I'm fishing, and also mixing up the section of the lake I'm in, I'm usually going to find those fish at some point in that process. I don't have to go and change a bunch of different baits because I know when those sunny sky conditions are there, that jig is going to work. And that's just kind of a good rule of thumb for me, at least in my area of the country, and it's a good rule of thumb pretty much all over the country. Now, let's say the conditions change, and I head out to Grand Lake, and I want to go to the exact same Horse Creek area. But instead of having sunny skies, we now have cloudy conditions, maybe some wind. So it's maybe pre-front, or we just have some cloudy, dark skies and a little bit of wind, whatever the reasoning for that is. Well, in that situation, I know that whenever I find some cloudy, windy conditions, there are two really good baits for me. A swim bait and a deep diving crankbait offshore, or then a crankbait up shallow, whether it's a square bill, a lipless crankbait, something like that. And basically, if I have no wind offshore, I'm throwing the swim bait. When I do have wind, I'm throwing the deep diving crankbait. So my go-to swim bait when it's cloudy, no wind, is a Mega Bass Spark Shad. I throw them in all three sizes, the 5-inch, the 3-inch, the 4-inch, and the 5-inch size. And I'll usually just kind of match the color to the water conditions. When it's really clear water, I'll go to like the albino color. And then when it's really dirty water, I'll go to this like pearl, it's hue color, this basically a pearl color, white color. And I'll put that on either, some sort of little swim bait jig head here for the smaller spark shads, maybe an underspin head when I want to go to a bigger swim bait, throwing it in like a 1/2 ounce to a 3/4 ounce. Nothing crazy. I've made a video explaining a complete guide to swim bait fishing offshore too. If you want to check that out, I have one on my channel talking about all the setups I use, rods, line, all that stuff. Again, not the point of this video. But I'll either pick up this when there's no wind and it's cloudy offshore, and then when it's windy and cloudy, I'll usually go to a Strike King 6XD crankbait or some sort of deep diving crankbait, whether that's a 6XD, a 5XD crankbait from Strike King, 8XD, 10XD, it just depends on the water depth. And I may have multiple depth deep diving crankbaits on the boat, but I'll usually just have a deep diving crankbait for my offshore fishing when it's cloudy and windy. And then for my shallow fishing, I want to have one of maybe 2 or 3 different shallow crankbaits. I might have like a Mega Bass S crank square bill. This is an awesome little square bill that Randy's got me fishing all the time now from our trips. And I'll throw like the 1.2 and the 1.5 model of the S crank up around shallow laydowns, logs, stuff like that. And then I'll also throw maybe a little bit deeper diving crankbait like a Spro Rock Crawler 55. This is kind of a 8 to 12 foot diving crankbait, and it gets a little bit deeper, that in-between zone, kind of like I did with the jig. I have my deep diving, or my deeper water jig with the Fish Moment offshore jig, my in-between bait, which is the finesse jig, and then my shallow, getting the thick cover jig, which is a Strike King Hack Tack heavy cover flipping jig. And then same thing applies for my crankbaits. For my offshore crankbait, I go to the 6XD. For my super shallow in the thick cover crankbait, it's the Mega Bass S crank. And then for the in-between depths, that mid-depth zone, I got the Rock Crawler 55. And between those 3 baits, I tie them on when it's windy, when it's cloudy. Those work year-round for me on Grand Lake. I can catch them in cold water, I can catch them in hot water temperatures. The big thing is I have to figure out where those fish are on the lake on a given day. So now that I've picked those baits, and again, there's other baits you could throw. You could throw different baits, and we'll talk about that in a second. But basically what you can do is take that same approach that we took earlier. Start on the main lake, fish or graph around deeper for some fish maybe offshore, move a little bit further into the pockets or into the mid-depth zone with that rock crawler, maybe fishing some rock transition banks, chunk rock banks, something like that, and then maybe go all the way to the backs of the pockets and the coves and fish the square-bill crankbait around. And usually, if you don't get bit here, you can find a bite on one of those baits somewhere in this area. For example, I know you can catch them on a rock crawler crankbait on Grand Lake as well as a square-bill on this riprap here. Pretty much any time when it's cloudy and windy in the winter time, and you can catch them offshore on a deep diving crankbait on the main lake, these main lake points and some of the stuff out here on a deep diving crankbait all the time on Grand. And then in the springtime, you can go way back in these pockets and there's laydowns and stuff, and you can catch them on a square bill. So I know that in any condition I can find a bite on those baits. And what I basically am doing with this, guys, is I'm trying to determine where the fish are and what they're doing by focusing on the conditions and not focusing on my bait. That is really, really key. When you're focused on the exact bait that you're trying to throw on a given fishing day, you miss the weather conditions. You miss the section of the lake you're fishing, the depth of water you're fishing, whether there's bait fish present. All these different factors really can throw off your ability to fish the moment. That's the name of the channel, Fish the Moment. And you want to be able to fish the moment as much as possible. So what I'm always trying to do is basically focus and key in on these ideal zones. The first third of the creek, the middle of the creek, the back of the creek. And then I'm going over here, and was I showing these? Oh yeah, I was showing baits. Okay, cool. Yeah, so you want to go and show these you want to go to these different baits and limit it to maybe 3 rods in the deck of the boat. 3 or 4 rods, that's it. And not mess around with all these other options every single day you go fishing. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm not going to go pick up different baits when I'm fishing offshore, fishing up shallow, for example. I might go find some fish out here on a football jig on a bright sunny day. And I might be able to catch some fish off of a point here with a brush pile. Boom, boom, catch a couple fish in a football jig. Once I catch those fish, they might stop biting, and I might be able to then go back and throw a 10-inch worm in there, or a shaky head, or a hair jig, or a flutter spoon, or something else to get a few more bites. But usually I can use that football jig to identify where the fish are. And then once I've identified that they're on the main lake in 20 foot of water around brush piles, I can now go graph every other point in this area in 20 foot of water where the brush piles are setting up and usually duplicate that spot somewhere in this zone. Same thing happens if you're back in here. If you're in here and you start figuring out that these fish are on boat docks and you are catching a few fish in the boat docks in a jig, you might be able to pick up a few extra fish fishing a jerkbait around those boat docks afterwards, or maybe throwing a spinner bait behind the docks, or fishing a shaky head in the dock, something like that. Or you might find that if you're catching them on a crankbait down some of these rocky banks, you can come back behind those same banks with a jig and pick up a few extra fish. But you're never going to know which banks to really focus on and which banks to experiment with baits on until you actually get bit on something. And my way of doing it is I love jigs, I love crankbaits, and I also like swim baits. So those are my 3 baits that I stick with day in and day out to locate my fish. And then I'll dial it in with different bait categories once I know where the fish are. That is the number one mistake I see every angler make that I've ever taken out in the water in a lesson or just talked to in virtual lessons, is they get so dialed in on what is the proper bait, the proper rod, the proper line, all those factors, and they miss the bigger picture, which is where you need to be fishing, and focusing your bait selection on a few minor aspects like one category of bait basically, instead of going into all the details, just picking one category of bait, sticking with it all day until you start getting bit, then make your adjustments. So that's kind of what I wanted to share with you guys today. I want to also go through and spend a lot of time answering some questions from you guys as well, because there's a lot of questions I know that you guys have, and I see a ton of different questions being thrown in here. So if you guys want me to talk about something specific, just type in @FishTheMoment in the chat and I'll be able to answer all your questions. I'm just going to spend probably like 30 minutes just talking to you guys. I don't really have anything else to go off of after I brought that topic up. It was a good 25-minute rant, I think. So see one question here asking if this is going to be put on the page afterwards. Yes, this will be posted to YouTube. It's only going to be up for a little while, and as I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, I'm actually going to be uploading all of these live streams and also doing all the live streams going forward on the Fish the Moment live YouTube channel. We have 1 subscriber, which is myself right now, and my mom hasn't even subscribed to this channel yet, guys. So what you guys should do is go over, type in Fish the Moment live. I also put a link to this channel down in the description. I'll put it on social media. I'll put it everywhere. This is where we're going to be live streaming going forward. So if you don't want to miss the Fish the Moment live stream in the coming weeks, make sure to subscribe to the Fish the Moment live YouTube channel. Again, description down below, and you'll see my upcoming live stream. We're going to be talking about why new crankbait fishermen can't catch fish, and Randy and I will be talking about the top 5 crankbait mistakes that anglers make. So it's going to be a really good live stream. I have some of the old live streams already posted up on the channel. So definitely go over, make sure you subscribe to this channel, make sure you're watching it, because this is where you're going to find all the live streams going forward. Another thing to call out is just a couple things while people are putting their questions down there, is that we have a couple upcoming things on fishthemoment.com. First is we have a new seminar I just added that I'm super excited about, guys. It is a seasonal bass movement seminar on man-made lakes with shad. It's kind of a specific deal, and it's not necessarily something that is... Let me transition this over here so you can see it. It's not something that's going to be for everyone, but if you are on a man-made lake like a Table Rock Lake, a Grand Lake in Oklahoma, stuff like that, that's where this seminar is really going to shine for you. And I'm going to be talking about how you can follow bass around the entire lake year-round based on shad movement, forage movement, their seasonal behavior. It's going to be a 3-hour seminar with a ton of graphics. I'm going to put probably 15 to 20 hours just into the slides for that seminar alone, plus all the experience I'm bringing to the table there too. So definitely check out the Seasonal Bass Movement Seminar. Guarantee you it's going to be the best seminar we've ever put on the website. I'm so excited about it, and I've talked about it with Randy, and I gave him the spiel, and he was like, oh man, that I've never heard it explained like that before. So I'm excited to share it with you guys. He seemed to really enjoy it, and I think you guys will really connect with this information as well. And that's going to be on Thursday, February 4th. And we also have a few spots left for the electronics seminar, Advanced Electronics on Side Imaging, Down Imaging, and 2D Sonar. Great seminar that I do pretty often, and it helps you dial in how to identify fish on your fish finder and tell if they're active or inactive, and how to really save a ton of time with your offshore fishing by graphing first, making sure the fish are catchable, and then getting to bite first cast. It's an awesome seminar there. One other thing I wanted to bring up is that we do have a lot more lake breakdowns coming onto the page. Our lake breakdowns give you 40 GPS waypoints on lakes all across the country, broken up by season. So we have winter breakdowns, we have fall breakdowns, and we just added a few spring breakdowns. They're becoming as we get them in. Randy's working on these like crazy. We also have our personal lake breakdowns, as always, that you can purchase with Randy. You can break down any lake in the country, any season of the year, for whatever you want. So that is that. So let's jump back over and start talking about some questions, and I'll bring my face back up here. There we go. Awesome. And John says, smash the like button. Always appreciate if you guys leave a like on the video. Always helps out the channel. So let's get some questions going. Let's see here. Oh, Mike is also saying, don't forget to plug buying baits through the link. That's a great, thank you, Mike. Yeah, you guys can go over to Fish the Moment. One thing that's really nice, if you head over to fishthemoment.com and then head over to the Support Fish the Moment page on our website, fishthemoment.com, support Fish the Moment, you can actually use our Tackle Warehouse link. And anytime you click this link on the website and then check out on Tackle Warehouse, we get a small percentage of the profits of every purchase you make. So if you really like the content, it's an easy way to support the channel. Just click on the link and you can just bookmark it. And then every single time you use Tackle Warehouse from now on, if you bookmark that page, we'll get a small percentage of the profits. Super easy. It's gonna set it and forget it. And we really appreciate it if you could do that as well. So appreciate the call out there, Mike. Now let's jump back over. So Tom's asking about rivers. So Tom, rivers for that strategy I was just talking about is going to act exactly the same. So for example, if I'm going down to fish let's see here. If I'm going down here to fish the Maumelle Pool of the Arkansas River, this is a straight up Arkansas River mud hole sort of deal. I grew up really close to this area, so very familiar with fishing on the Arkansas River, and my bait selection on the Arkansas River is exactly the same. If you guys know about river fishing, not very complicated. You need a jig, you need a crankbait, and that's pretty much it. That's what I throw on rivers, and I pretty much throw the exact same jigs. The only exception is I might switch out the finesse jig for a well, you can still throw a finesse jig too, but I switch it out for a swim jig a lot of times. But if I have bright sunny skies, I'm throwing a jig 75% of the time on rivers anyways, especially when I'm searching for them. So when I go to the Arkansas River, and I used to live like right over in like this area over here, so I would just launch the boat, and I didn't have like that much gas in the boat or anything. I would just kind of launch right over here in this area and then I would take off and I would just go into backwaters. I would go back into some of these areas in here, these creeks. I'd stay out in the main river. I would just kind of bounce around and I would fish a jig, and that's all I would do. I would take a jig and I would just fish a jig, fish a jig, fish a jig. And you have no idea how many fish I've caught within a mile of this boat ramp, up and down on a jig, probably thousands of fish. And I would just basically take that one bait and just learn where the fish set up. River fish actually are so current oriented that the bait necessarily isn't always the biggest deal. Locating where they are on a given day is a lot more important. So just picking up a jig you can flip around, or picking up a square bill crankbait that you can bounce around laydowns, maybe fish on some jetties that stick out into the middle of the river. Just focus on taking a few different baits, and my focus on rivers usually is focused on fishing the main river or then fishing backwaters. So you're usually going to be dealing with fish in the main river, the mouth of the backwaters, the back of the backwaters, or then like way back into the creeks. And I'll just figure out on any given day which one of those is better, and I'll just kind of run around. And once you learn the rivers, you kind of know how to run in pretty quick. And I'll know within 2-3 hours whenever I fish this pool whether the best bite's on the main river, the back of the creek, way back of the creek, or maybe right in the mouth of these creeks. And I'll be able to kind of dial that in. So that's what I do on the river. Same exact approach. Take the jig, take the crankbait, roll through these areas, and you'll be able to put fish in the boat. Specific spots and everything, again, I've made videos explaining where to fish on rivers and all this different stuff over the years. So check out the YouTube channel for a ton of content on where to fish. But I'm just talking high-level strategy here at this point. Oh, and then Marshall says, yeah, I'm definitely guilty of everything he said thus far. Wow, tons of questions. I jumped down to the bottom, which is good. I don't want to skip anyone from earlier, though, so let me keep going here. So Mike, best conditions for throwing a deep diving jerkbait. So deep diving jerkbait, for me, you can throw it in the exact same situation when I like to throw a swim bait. So whenever you would think about fishing a swim bait offshore, that's when a deep diving crankbait also works. Usually that's going to be when you have bright bluebird skies and like no wind. That's a great time to fish a swim bait. You can also get some fish to bite the jerkbait, though it's a little bit tough. Or when you have those cloudy days with no wind. Cloudy days with no wind are great for deep diving jerkbait. I don't honestly throw a jerkbait all that much. Randy throws it a lot more than I do, but I throw a swim bait to kind of compensate for that. I actually find that I can catch more fish on a little swim bait, like a little mega bass spark shad, than I can on a jerkbait, and I can fish it a little bit quicker, kind of work through those areas as long as I'm using my electronics. So I actually have put jerkbaits kind of aside, and I've gone to throwing a lot more swim baits to trigger my strikes rather than the jerkbait over the years. There are times when jerkbaits are still dominant, but I love throwing swim baits now, and that's kind of my deal. Next question from Keith. What color are you and Randy throwing on table rock with the square bill? So in terms of color selection, guys, when you're going through baits, I find that the easiest thing to do is just pick a color that has a neutral body to it. So right here, this Fisherman Offshore jig, go into a peanut butter and jelly. Peanut butter and jelly works in every single water clarity. That's why I throw it. It's like my number one go-to color in the Fisherman Offshore jig. Peanut butter and jelly works great in clear water. In dirty water, it just stands out really well. And I just put a green pumpkin trailer on it, and you can throw that in any single water visibility. Don't need to mess around with baits too much. When I'm fishing a pro spider jig, my go-to is actually throw a black and blue flash with a green pumpkin trailer. They'll still eat a black and blue jig with a green pumpkin trailer in super clear water as well as in that dirtier water. So that's a great color that's like a go-to. And then for my hack attack flipping jig, if I'm flipping a jig, it's a black and blue jig. And I'm either putting a green pumpkin trailer in clear water or just a black and blue trailer in dirty water. For my swim baits, again, clear water, I'm throwing the translucent colors. And then when I'm in the dirty water, I'm throwing the bright pearls. In terms of the crankbaits, for my deep diving crankbaits, I'm usually, when I'm trying to really dial it in, I just go with a chartreuse blue back crankbait like this right here whenever the water visibility is less than 3 foot of visibility. And then when I have more than 3 foot of visibility, it's pretty clear water, I go to the sexy blueback herring. Where are you? Here we go. Sexy blueback herring. This is a really good clear water color on that crankbait. For the Megabass S-Crank, when the water is really dirty, less than a foot of visibility, I like to go to the black back chartreuse. And then when it's clearer than that, I'm usually going to this Mega Bass Sexy Shad, just a regular Sexy Shad crankbait. And once I start getting bit on the crankbait, that's when you start dialing in colors. One thing I'll always say to you guys is don't start by changing colors and try to expect that to get bites. If you're not getting bit on a Sexy Shad Mega Bass crankbait, you're not going to get bit on a French Pearl crankbait or a Secret Gill crankbait. Changing colors like that is not going to make that big of a difference. It really isn't. The biggest thing to focus on is, you can get just as many bites on a Fire Crawl crankbait as a black backside cruise when they're really eating a crankbait. The only thing is that you might be able to get 2 or 3 extra bites, or maybe the fish will eat it front hook first rather than back hook first if you change up the color. So color selection is done once you've located the fish. Before that, just pick up either a black back chartreuse or a Mega Bass Sexy Shad. Just roll down the bank and locate the fish first, then determine the key subtle adjustments with the color. Hopefully that makes sense. Frank, if you've already bought Lake Breakdown for a season, is there value in getting a new update Lake Breakdown? Frank, I would just say stick with the old Breakdown unless you just want to get them uploaded onto the GPS. The reason we switched all these over is it was just too complicated to have 2 different sets of Lake Breakdowns. People were too confused. So for our Lake Breakdowns, the new ones have waypoints that are straight on the fish finder. If you have the old paper map version where we just did circles, the waypoints are pretty much the same, so I wouldn't go repurchasing them. Just if you want them to go straight on your fish finder, that's the reason, but the waypoints are pretty much the same. So, just a call out there. Okay, Alan's asking, I fish TVA lakes, predominantly the river sections, want to fish crankbaits, but it's current and wood. I'll lose $100 every day. Any tricks for that? Alan, if you're throwing a crankbait, a square bill crankbait, you should not be losing. I've had the same I have a same Strike King 1.5 square bill crankbait that I've thrown for like years, and same thing with like RC 1.5, Lucky Craft, and I have the same Mega Bass. I've actually got some crankbaits from Randy, some Mega Bass, and I've not lost a single one of them. The reason for that is because usually these square bill crankbaits, 1, they deflect off a cover really well, and 2, even if they get hung up, they don't dive more than like 3 or 4 feet deep. So all you have to do is just reel your reel and reel your rod tip down to where you actually can hit that crankbait and just pop it free with your rod tip. Just reel your line all the way until the bait is hitting the tip of your rod and just shake it, and that crankbait will come off and you'll hardly ever lose any. You can also get a plug knocker to get unhung, but square bill crankbaits, they don't get hung up very often. Randy did a video actually we did on Table Rock where he was throwing them in the middle of lay down trees and stuff like that, and these baits are designed to deflect cover, so you're not going to lose hardly any baits. And actually a square bill crankbait is great when there's current and wood. Wood and current are perfect places to throw a square bill crankbait, and you catch a ton of fish doing that. So actually, I would say that that's the perfect situation you're in to catch them. Let's see here. Zach says, and how often will you regraph an area that you didn't see fish on? Will you graph over a spot multiple times over the course of a trip if you don't mark bass? The big thing with that, Zach, is that if I can see some shad presence in an area, so if I see that there's a bunch of shad presence like in this general area, I might regraph the same point or the same area multiple times, but usually I don't regraph the same area often, unless I just like have a really good feeling about it. Like let's say I saw a bunch of fish and shad out here over the channel earlier in the day, and then later in the day I feel like they might move up onto this point, for example. But other than that, I don't normally regraph areas, because you just don't have a lot of time in a fishing day to go regraph stuff. I'm looking for spots that are happening right when I'm on the lake. So I'll just keep graphing until I find something that's really happening. One thing I will say about just graphing in general is that you're going to graph for a long time in dead stretches of the lakes. You're going to graph, like, for example, this 1 mile section will have nothing going on. And all of a sudden, this next mile section will just have all the best spots in the entire lake. And there's just certain weeks in the year when certain sections are better than others. So, for example, the first week of June, this might be the best section for offshore spots on the lake. The third week of July, this might be the best section, and this section sucks. So it's very easy to go from having a section being really good to being really bad very quickly just on the time of year. So I will regraph the same area multiple times throughout a given year. So like in the summertime, I've regraphed the same spot 12 fishing trips in a row. And on the 12th time I graphed the spot, even though I never saw fish on it the first 11 times I graphed it earlier that year, the 12th time it was loaded and I caught a bunch of fish. So don't think about these spots as if you graph them once in June, it's a bad spot. They could show up there literally the next day, so you have to regraph these areas every single time you go to the lake to determine where the fish are. And using that approach of going main lake, middle of the creek, back of the creek, always is a good approach to do that. Let's see here. Can you talk about executing your plan on natural lakes with no real structure, just vegetation? Yeah, so let me duplicate this real quick. If we go to a natural lake, the approach is going to be a little bit different because you're dealing with grass. So let's just go up here to one of my home lakes back in Wisconsin. I grew up in Wisconsin for 12 years. This is Big Green Lake. So if you're on Big Green, the lakes look very different where there's no creeks and stuff like that. And so what I do is I usually take the approach of trying to find the fish within like a flat like this. So for example, you have a super deep like glacier lake, 200 feet deep in the center. Some are not this deep. I'll show you a different example here in a second. But usually you're going to have like a deep center and it comes up really fast to a big flat. And this flat goes on forever until you get to the bank here. And what you'll find is that I treat this lake, I break it up almost like the ocean out here, the middle of nowhere. You have the edge of the main flat on the lake. You have the middle of the flat, you have the inside grass line, and then you have the bank. And I'll break up the lake like that. So usually you're going to be able to catch fish right on the bank or on boat docks. The inside grass line where the grass just starts to grow, usually have hydrilla, milfoil, something like that on those grassy lakes up north, mainly milfoil. Then you're going to have just a vast section of just middle of nowhere area. Then you'll have your outside grass line. Then you'll have the main area out here that has like nothing. And usually I'm going to just kind of take that same approach. If I'm fishing around the grass, it's going to be a jig when it's sunny, and then when it's cloudy, I can still catch them on a squirrel crankbait really well actually in the grass, but usually I'm going to something like a chatterbait or some other bait that might come through the grass just a tiny bit better. But a jig is a great way to cover water, even like a swim jig versus a regular jig. You can basically start with jig up north year round and just crush them. Well, not year round because it's through the ice, but you get what I'm saying. Now, if you're on a smaller lake, let's say Fox Lake. Fox Lake has a similar setup where you have a deeper area out here, and you're usually going to have some sort of inside grass line. So if we just take like this area here, you might have grass that grows out all the way to like 9-10 foot, and then out here there's no grass. Then you have your first grass line, you have the middle of nowhere with a bunch of grass, you have the inside grass line, you have the bank. So I will just work my way methodically from the middle of the ocean out here where there's no grass, looking for perch or bluegill out here in the middle. Sometimes it happens in the fall. Then I'll go to the outside grass line, see if there's anything out there. I'll then kind of fan cast through the middle of the grass beds, work my way to the inside grass line, then work my way to the bank. Check all those different sections throughout different parts of the lake. I'm actually going up to Wisconsin this summer, and I'll be filming on a lot of these lakes. So I'll be doing a lot of videos on natural lakes, literally in this area this summer. So you'll be able to see how I break down lakes. I'll make extensive videos about it. So you'll be able to check that out from my future YouTube videos. Hopefully that made sense though. Fish Mode, would you agree that everyone should have these 5 baits? Crankbait, spinnerbait, paddletail, swimbait, plastic creature bait, and jigs. Yeah, that sounds like a pretty good lineup there. I don't throw spinnerbaits hardly at all anymore. I hardly throw plastic creature baits. Honestly, crankbait, jig, paddletail, swimbait, that covers 90% of what I throw or I'm catching my fish on most of the time, my decent fish. Now, I catch a lot more big fish on other baits, and you can see from one of my recent videos I made about the different baits I throw and the percentage of time. But if you wanted to group all my baits in different categories, basically a crankbait, a swim bait, and a jig account for like 80% of what I fish. And so that's what I find works really well for me. That's just a personal thing, but that's how I've kind of dialed in my fishing. And again, I focus on where I'm fishing as opposed to what I'm fishing. That's the biggest key to becoming a better fisherman, is getting over the fascination of going on the Tackle Warehouse or maybe watching some of these YouTube channels that give you 75 different baits every other day to go buy and purchase and try out. Because the more you're trying, the way I was always told is the more time you spend digging around in your tackle box tying on baits, the less time you actually have your bait in the water and you're actually catching fish. And the more time you're worried about, oh man, is the when I'm throwing my crankbait, do I need to be throwing the real shad or the sexy black herring or the sexy green shad or the sexy shad? Ooh, I'm going to try all of these on the same spot to see if that small, tiny color change makes a difference. It won't. Even going from a striking 6XD to a different brand of deep diving crankbait, not going to make a big difference. It might get you a few extra bites once you find the fish, but you need to find them first to actually catch them. That's the number one thing about fishing. Now, Aaron asking, I'm planning on a fishing trip this spring with my 8-year-old son, going to pull the boat. What lakes would you recommend in the spring to have a really memorable experience? I don't know, Aaron. It depends on where you are in the country. It's kind of a hard question to answer. I would just go to the Bassmaster Top 100 Lakes list. That's always a good place to start. Just go to Bassmaster Top 100 Lakes, find the closest one in your area, and you should be able to find some good lakes there. Turned up bass, and how long would you fish a certain bait for until you switch to a different bait? I will basically throw, like, I've gone days where I just throw a football jig all day. I mean, I might throw, it depends on what I'm fishing, kind of like I talked about earlier. So if I'm offshore in deeper water, I'm picking up the football jig. If I'm in 5 to 10 foot of water, I'm picking up the finesse jig, football jig in 10 plus feet of water, and then I'm picking the flipping jig when I'm in 5 or less feet of water. A fishing lure is a tool. It's a tool that you use to dissect the areas you're fishing. The fishing lure doesn't make the fisherman. It's where you throw the fishing lure and when you throw it there. That's what makes good fishermen. That's what makes Kevin Van Dam. If just buying one of these jigs, tying it on, and going to the lake would make you a better fisherman, everyone would be fishing the Bassmasters. It's all about making a decision of when. So I think about my baits as tools. So I switch from a football jig to a finesse jig when I go from 10 plus feet of water to 5 to 10 feet of water. And then when I go shallower, let's say I'm fishing 5 or feet or less, that's when I switch to the hack attack jig, because that's the best bait, the most efficient bait for the types of areas I'm fishing. That's kind of how I think about it, but I'm just going to stick with a jig. Just stick with a jig when it's those sunny conditions like I talked about earlier, and you're going to catch more fish. Marshall's asked, do you ever pick a Texas rig over a jig? If so, pros and cons of each. I'll definitely go to a Texas rig over a jig. If I start getting some bites, sometimes you'll actually get bit on a jig and you'll feel the thump it. They'll bite it really hard and they'll miss it and they won't take it. And a lot of times when I'm fishing like this finesse jig, for example, if I get a lot of short strikes or I feel one on and I set the hook and I miss them, that's when I might go over and pick up like a Reaction Innovation Sweet Beaver, Texas rig, or a Texas rig worm or something different to fish around. But the finesse jig will get the same bites that this creature bait does. It's just this creature bait might get you more bites. Or if there's a lot of fishing pressure in your area, instead of fishing a jig in a tournament day, I might not even fish a jig tournament day. I might find him in practice with the jig, but then tournament day I'm coming behind with a shaky head or a wacky worm because everyone else is in that area now fishing jigs. What I'm using the jig for a lot of times is my tool to find the fish. But once I actually find them, I dial it in with different baits. You've seen me do that with Randy, actually, where I'll go out in those shallow versus offshore challenges, and Grand Lake was a great example one of those days. I spent a bunch of time trying to find the fish, and I rolled around, and I finally got one fish off of this main lake point out here on a football jig. It was like a nice 2.5 pounder. It was the only bite I got there, though, and I couldn't get him to bite anything else. And I finally was like, okay, I'm going to keep checking some of these main lake points. And I rolled over here and found this main lake point that was loaded up. And I got 2 fish in a row on the football jig, and they stopped biting it. But then, after I caught those couple fish on the football jig, I knew there were more fish in the area. So I then picked up a swim bait, put a few more fish in the boat. Picked up a deep diving crankbait, put a few extra fish in the boat. Caught my biggest fish in a Neko rig. So I changed up a bunch of different baits once I dialed in where the fish were. But I will stick with that jig until I start getting bit, because I know I'm going to get bit on that bait. I don't repeat myself on that point, but it's very, very important. Lucky Charms asks, do you have muskie in any of the lakes? No muskie in my lakes, unfortunately, down here. We have them, or fortunately, but I did have them up north where I was fishing, growing up in Wisconsin. Let's see here. Timos, does water clarity rules for depth apply in the winter? So yeah, water clarity rules, TMO for depth, they apply in the winter as well. Anytime really the water clarity depth lines will apply, the ones I've talked about in my other videos, just because that is usually, it dictates where the bass can feed effectively and where the bait fish can feed. So water temperature doesn't affect those guidelines. It's all about the ability to actually see what the bait fish to be able to see where they're feeding. That's kind of where those water clarity guidelines I've given in the past come from. Let's see here. And K4K says, I can't bring myself to drop $19 in a crankbait. That's what you guys have seen. Like, he's talking about the Megabass. One thing I found with these Megabass crankbaits, the reason I've gone to them is because I've thrown a ton of Strike King KB 1.5s and other crankbaits over the years, and I break a bunch of lips, break bills on those crankbaits, whether I'm hitting them off the trolling motor or hitting them on rocks or whatever. I break a bunch of bills on those crankbaits. I've never broken a bill on one of these crankbaits. Randy's never broken one in the boat. They're really rock solid, which for me is really important because I feel like this bait, it may not get that many extra bites over like a $6-7 striking crankbait, but they're going to last a lot longer. So for me, I don't want to have to sit down and retime my crankbaits throughout the day, and I'm never really losing these crankbaits because I'm throwing them on heavier line. They're shallow diving crankbaits, so I would prefer to spend $19 on a crankbait that's not going to break and rip or get a hole in it and start leaking, stuff like that. That's the reason I've gone these square bills that are a little bit more powerhouses. But you can see I'm not recommending the Megabass Deep Diver because if you're fishing a Striking 6XD in a brush pile, you have a lot harder chance getting that crankbait back. So I prefer to go to a $5.99 Striking 6XD just because if I do lose it, it's not as big of a deal. So, and I'm not going to be usually holding on to these for months. Like, I might go through one of these crankbaits a trip as opposed to a Megabass. I still have yet to go through one. So that's how I make my decisions on my crankbaits. Then there's some of the in-between, like the Spro rock collar. Still $10 for a crankbait, not cheap, but you usually can get these crankbaits back with like a lure retriever pole and stuff like that. Let's see here. John says, my first bass of the year came on cold, high water. Caught it on the Fish Moment jig. That's what I'm talking about. Good stuff, John. So William asks, I have an issue with reel speed to use for different depths of crankbaits. I use a 5.3 to 1 or a 5.4 to 1 reel on my deep diving crankbaits because it gives you extra torque, which then allows you to reel that bait at a quicker pace, easier. The extra torque of a low gear ratio reel will make it so you aren't tired out as much. A lot of guys say they throw their deep diving crankbaits in a 6 to 1 or 7 to 1 gear ratio reel. I don't know how they do it. If you're throwing deep diving crankbait all day on a 7 to 1 reel, your arm will either fall off or you're an Olympic arm wrestler. I don't know how you do it. And like, I do CrossFit with my wife, so I'm not like super out of shape, but it's still just like grinding a crankbait fast, because I fish my deep diving crankbaits fast on a 7 to 1 gear ratio reel will just wear you out. And I don't know how guys do it. So I use a 6.3 to 1, 6.4 to 1 gear ratio reel. When I'm fishing my square bills, I like to throw either a 7 to 1 or a 6.4 to 1, and then I throw a 6.4 to 1 gear ratio reel on my medium diving crankbaits. That's kind of my go-to. Casey says, got skunked bad yesterday in Dardanelle Bay. Cold, muddy water sucks. Any ideas? Casey, don't fish cold, muddy water. That is a great thing to do. If you're fishing Dardanelle, go fish the strip pits back in here. Actually, let me get out of here. Let me pull up Google Earth. If you're struggling in that cold, muddy water, just get out of the cold, muddy water. That's my best suggestion. Get back here in the strip pits, back in here with the clear water. Oh, sorry, I'm not showing Google Earth. Here we go. This is Illinois Bayou right here. If you go to Illinois Bayou, you can head back in these strip pits. There's a bunch of them. These are great winter areas. You have that clear water even on the river system, so you can sneak back into some of those. You can also head back into Piney Bay. Usually has a little bit clearer water. You can also head back into the back of Delaware Bay. These areas all are a little bit clearer, and they'll help you catch a lot more fish in the winter. You can even head into Shoal. Those Shoals are a little bit sketchy to get into nowadays, so maybe if you don't know how to run back in here, maybe skip Shoal for now. What's your go-to baits post-frontal with high winds? Post frontal high winds, I find I can crush them on like a deep diving or medium diving crankbait, actually. Crankbaits are a great post frontal bait when there's a lot of wind. Those fish are still really aggressive in the post front when there's wind. Now, right when that wind dies, that's when I pick up the jig again. So I go to the jig right when that wind dies, but in those sunny, windy conditions in the post front, I hammer them on a deep diving crankbait. The fish will pull out a little bit deeper. Don't go for the square bills and stuff up shallow, but go to a medium diver or a deep diving crankbait, and you can usually find spots where they're loaded up and just hammer them. One great example is over here on Grand. We had a post front sunny, windy day in the morning, and there was a point that sticks out here, and you can't really see it on the map super well, but there's like a rock ridge that sticks out. And there were a bunch of fish that you could catch up shallower the day before when it was, gusting and pre-front. You could just throw a spinnerbait down the bank and hammer them. But then after that front came through, all those fish pulled out. But because the wind was still up, they were still somewhat aggressive, and so they were sitting off of a little rocky ridge that stuck out right here that was in like the tip of the ridge was in 9 feet of water. Now I was throwing a medium diving crankbait there, and boom, 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 caught some really good fish. Came back later when the sun was out and there was no wind, and I caught another good like 2.5 pounder on a jig off the same spot. So usually when the wind is up, post front, cranking is still the way to go. Let's see here. Mike says, do you ever immediately fish spots you graph over that have fish, or do you fish, or when the fish look active, or do you mark the spot and look for more? I find, Mike, that whenever I graph over a spot and I see fish there, I want to fish there immediately, because one of the biggest myths in fishing is that graphing over a spot is going to spook the fish. Almost every single spot that you've ever seen me catch a fish in a Fish Mode YouTube video offshore has been after I've just graphed over that spot. I probably graphed over 2 or 3 times to get the pretty sonar recording for you guys. Then I stopped, and then I cast in there. So I've probably driven over that spot 3 times with the boat before I've ever made a cast, and I still catch a ton of fish. Is it better to not graph over them? Yes, obviously. If you have the fish found already and you can pull up and cast on them without driving over them, that's better, but you have to find the fish first. So if you graph over a school of fish or a spot that looks active, spin right around, cast on them right away. A lot of times, if you wait 2-3 hours to fish that spot and come back later, the feeding window might have been over, and you might try to fish the spot, not catch anything, and graph over it and realize all the fish are gone. And that happens very often offshore. They'll move up and down on these offshore areas, these feeding spots, and you have to be there when they're feeding to really get them to bite. So if you see an active spot offshore on your graph, fish it right away. Let's see here. Have you ever started using braid more now that you have live scope? No, I haven't. I don't really use braid that much just because of I don't like how it rips holes in the fish's mouth, and I feel like I lose more fish on braid. I do throw braid on my spinning rods just for braid to fluorocarbon leader, just so I can cast it easier. But no, I don't really like throwing braid that much. I just find that it's a pain in the butt, to be honest. Josh, do you always fish with a trailer on your jigs? If not, what dictates using your trailer? I always throw a trailer on my jigs, always. The Fish Mode offshore jig, some guys have said you don't need a trailer because it has this nice long skirt on it. The reason we put the skirt on here is because when you're fishing a big bulky trailer like a brush hog in the summer, sometimes it's nice to have like a big bulky trailer with a big long skirt. A lot of times that generates a lot of giant bites. It's one of the best ways in the Ozarks to catch a 6 or 7 pounder in the summer. But most of the time when I'm running this jig, I'll trim that skirt to be within a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch from the hook, bend of the hook, and I'll put either like a striking menace grub or a striking rage craw on the back of this jig and go to town. Now, again, in the summer, when those fish are a lot more focused on feeding on big shad, big bluegill, and they're really actively feeding, I'll go to the full-length skirt with like a full-size zoom brush hog on the back of this jig, and man, I've caught some giants doing that. So that's one way to go about it, is throwing that big trailer, big long skirt on that jig. Let's see here. Timo says, please talk about your Fish Mode live channel again. When will it premiere? So Timo, I'm going to be posting all the upcoming live streams onto the Fish the Moment live YouTube channel. Let me see if anyone's actually gone and subscribed while we've been on here. 42. So you guys are the best. You beat my mom to subscribing. So if you guys like the live streams and you want to make sure you don't miss them, go over to the Fish the Moment live YouTube channel. I put a link in the description of this video. Every single live stream going forward is going to be on this channel. It's to avoid confusion so that when I'm posting a live stream, you don't confuse it with my normal length YouTube videos. I have some YouTube videos I put out every single week. I'm going to be putting them out every Thursday on the Fish Moment main channel. And those videos take me 20 to 40 hours to produce. I'm usually spending about 20 hours in the lake actually filming the videos, and then 20, maybe even 25 hours editing them. And I want you guys to make sure you're not confused between the live streams and those super highly produced videos. And it's been kind of confusing up to this point. So I'm doing all the live streams here going forward. And I'm actually going to be doing little super cuts of these live streams as well. So if you go to the channel, every day I'm going to be breaking up these bigger live streams into 5 to 15 minute little supercut clips that you can watch, so you don't have to watch the entire stream. So that's going to be happening on the Fish Moment Live YouTube channel. Go down in the description below. You'll see that I already have some live streams posted, and the next live stream is going to be next Tuesday at 6, or it says 6 p.m. It should be 7 p.m. We need to change that, but 7 p.m. Central Time. 7 p.m. Central Time on Fish the Moment Live, and it's going to be on why new crankbait fishermen struggle to catch fish. It's a top 5 crankbait fishing mistakes. Me and Randy will be back on talking about this, and so this is going to be where you can find it, Fish the Moment Live. So definitely go there and subscribe. I'll put it on all my social media and stuff, so hopefully you guys won't miss it. But yeah, if you don't see the live stream anymore on the Fish the Moment channel, it's because it's moved here. Awesome. So, cool. Casey says, thanks for your advice. I live 6 minutes from the ramp at Darty. Next time you're in town, hit me up. For sure. I fished Dardanelle a ton when I was younger, so no problem there. John says, what kind of knot do you tie your jig if you're using fluorocarbon? So, I always use a Palomar knot. That's something that a lot of guys have kind of conflict about. And the reason I use the Palomar knot is because it's the simplest to tie, and as long as you tie it properly, it's never going to break. And I'm going to make a video about that coming up pretty soon here, on how to tie the FG knot. Super easy way to tie the FG knot, which is what I use to connect my main line for my spinning rod, which is usually braid to like a fluorocarbon leader. And then the only other knot I tie is a Palomar knot for all my fluorocarbon. And there's a certain way you tie that Palomar knot where you will not break off. It will not burn the line. It's a very specific way to tie it, but once you get it down, it's super fast. And I also tie a snell knot when I'm flipping like heavy cover with a big weight and a flipping hook, but I do that like once every 4 years, so I don't really ever tie a snell knot. I actually have to look up YouTube videos on how to do it when I do it. So that's it. And Cody says, wish I didn't buy every bait sooner. Bought so many watching our channels that I don't think I'll use them at all. Yeah, that's the thing, guys, that I find is frustrating about. That's actually the reason I started my YouTube channel. I'm literally telling you guys, the reason I started my YouTube channel is because I would go fishing and I would say, okay, what are the main reasons I would catch fish? One is because I knew where on a contour map to go look to find fish, whether it's offshore or up shallow. Next, I knew how the conditions affected the fish. And third, I knew how to effectively strategize my day. Fishing lures came way after that, but all the instruction on fishing on YouTube focuses on fishing lures, fishing tackle, fishing equipment. And I know it's the easiest thing, that's what people want to talk about. It's kind of a sexy topic, go and buy stuff. But if you want to improve your fishing, you'll notice that most of my YouTube videos really don't focus on tackle at all. They're focused on all the other aspects of fishing, which are really important, and that's what I try to focus on here at Fish the Moment. So that's what we've been getting into. So that's probably going to be it for the stream, guys. Just a one more quick reminder: head over to the Fish the Moment YouTube channel or the Fish the Moment website and check out our lake breakdowns, and also check out the upcoming seminar. I'm telling you guys, this seasonal bass movement seminar, if your lake is man-made and has shad and herring in it, whether it is like Lake Dardanelle, Grand Lake, Table Rock Lake, any of the TVA fisheries, man-made lakes with shad in it, or blueback herring, whether you're out in the East Coast over there on Lake Hartwell, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, all those lakes will apply, and it's going to be an amazing seminar to explain when each or where the fish are going to be in every season of the year, what conditions cause them to be in different sections, whether you have high rising water, whether you have a winter drawdown, whether you have some weird weather coming in, all those things I'll explain how bass move on those lakes so you can stay with them year round. And you can basically eliminate 90% of the lake before you ever take a step into your boat, or before you ever launch your boat. You can eliminate 90% of the water on the lake right away. And something that I do a lot, and you see in my YouTube videos, I'm able to quickly find fish in my challenges with Randy. The reason I'm able to do that is the information I'm going to teach in this webinar. It's going to be by far the best webinar I will ever give on this channel, on the website. By far, I'm going to put a ton of effort into it. I've already started making it, and it's not till February 4th, and I'm like jacked up just thinking about it because I'm so excited to share all this info with you guys. So definitely sign up for the seminar. You can also sign up for the Advanced Electronics seminar over here, but if you had to pick one, just go sign up for the Seasonal Bass Movement. On if you have shad in your lake and it's a man-made lake, go sign up for that one. That's the one to watch. I'm telling you guys, that's the one. So anyways, appreciate everyone joining. John got the $5 super chat. Thanks, John. Says, woo pig. Thanks, brother. Woo pig. I need to bring back the Arkansas tattoo. I'm not really representing my alma mater over here, but really excited. And by the way, the all these seminars are recorded, so you can sign up for the seminar, and then afterwards I'll send you the full recording. You can watch it back as many times as you want. So even if you can't make the seminar live, you can still sign up. I'll send you the recording afterwards. We only have 30 spots available just because that's how we like to do it, not have too many people on, so everyone gets a chance to get their questions answered, get some personal interaction. That's how we like to roll, and so that is what we'll be doing. So definitely check that out, and hopefully you guys are enjoying all of the content on Fish the Moment. We're going to be, again, I've talked to you guys about this a little bit, but I've been spending the last month and a half dialing everything in, getting some footage filmed so I can go every single Thursday putting a video on the Fish the Moment main channel. These are going to be super high quality videos with 2 days, 3 days on the water usually filming, and then 2 or 3 days in my office editing right here, editing the content to give you guys the best possible instruction every Thursday on Fish the Moment. And then we'll be doing live streams every Tuesday on the new Fish the Moment live YouTube channel. So let's see where we are at right now. I think some guys talked about this. 76 subscribers. You guys are awesome. So go subscribe to Fish the Moment Live. Set a reminder on this. Make sure you share that out with friends too, if you have friends that like Fish the Moment, so you don't miss all of the live streams coming up, and we'll be posting about that. Now, and that, guys, thanks again for checking out the live stream. Always appreciate all the support and everyone tuning in, and we'll see you guys next Tuesday on the Fish the Moment Live YouTube channel for another live stream, and Randy will be back with me. So thanks again for checking out the stream, and I'll see you guys next week.